The wind rolled down from the high ridges of the blue pines, scattering gold leaves across the narrow streets of Pine Ferry. The lake, a glassy oval at the town's edge, caught the last light of October like an old mirror, cracked but still holding sky. Harlan Pierce stood on the porch of his small, weather-beaten cabin overlooking that lake. 60 years had carved him into something like the mountains themselves, steady, scarred, stubbornly intact. His hair, once dark as coal smoke, was now salt and iron, his face lined deep around the eyes, a roadmap of late nights and memories that refused to sleep. A faint limp marked his walk, a souvenir from his last rescue mission 15 years ago, the day fire swallowed half a neighborhood and one fragile heartbeat he hadn't saved. He bent down, fastening the worn collar of his dog, Buddy, a 7-year-old German shepherd with a brindled coat and the steady eyes of a soldier who had seen too much. The dog had been his partner once, back when sirens and smoke were daily companions. Together, they had searched through collapsed homes, burning warehouses, frozen forests. Buddy still moved with the silent precision of duty, though his muzzle had turned silver, and a scar above his left paw told a story Harlan never spoke aloud. The town around them was small, the kind where gossip traveled faster than the mail truck, and where everyone still waved, whether they liked you or not. Harlan worked as a real estate broker now. Broker being a generous word for a man who mostly fixed up old properties and found homes for families who had nowhere else to go. He had a talent for recognizing when a house was more than a stack of wood and nails, when it could still hold someone's hope. Still, despite his purpose, there were nights when he woke gasping, hearing again the creak of timbers collapsing, the cry that came too late, and the crack of heat that ended everything. He would find Buddy's head resting on his chest, eyes steady, reminding him, "You're still here." But survival, Harlan knew, was not the same as peace. That afternoon, the air smelled of wet pine and chimney smoke. The postwoman, a short, wiry woman in her 40s named Denise Harper, trudged up the hill in her navy jacket. Denise had a brisk, no-nonsense gait and the humor of someone who'd outlived 3 bad marriages and still managed to whistle. "You planning to hibernate up here, Pierce?" she called, handing him a thick brown envelope. Harlan smiled faintly, taking it. "Might. Depends what the winter brings." "Snow, debt, and my ex-husband's Christmas lights," she replied dryly. Then, lowering her voice, "This one's certified, county seal, thought you should sign for it." He signed, curiosity dim under years of discipline. Government mail rarely meant good news. The envelope was stamped Jackson County Probate Office. The name stirred a faint pulse of memory. His mother's hometown, where summers smelled of lilacs and smoke from logging mills. The return address bore a name he hadn't seen since childhood, Edna Latham. His great-aunt, if he remembered right. A reclusive woman who once sent him postcards of the lake when he was 10, before time and distance swallowed the thread between families. "Everything all right?" Denise asked, studying his hesitation. He nodded absently. "Just didn't expect to hear from anyone down there." "Better than a bill," she said with a wink, then marched back toward her truck, boots crunching on gravel. Harlan stood for a long moment, thumb tracing the flap of the envelope. Buddy whined softly, sensing his unease. "Yeah," Harlan murmured. "I don't like surprises either." Inside, the living room was simple. Pine wood walls, a worn leather armchair, a small cast-iron stove where Buddy often slept. The air smelled faintly of coffee grounds and sawdust. He slit the envelope open with his pocket knife. A folded letter and a legal deed slid out, yellowed at the edges. He sat down, reading slowly, lips tightening. To Mr. Harlan Pierce, it began, you are the designated heir to the property formerly owned by the late Ms. Edna Latham, located on parcel 42B near Lake Carden. The property includes one wooden outbuilding, recorded as a storage structure, and surrounding land of approximately 3 acres. County engineers advise caution due to minor subsidence and shoreline erosion. Please contact the undersigned for estate transfer confirmation. Below was a signature and a note in older handwriting, faintly feminine. Harlan, if you're reading this, the place waited long enough. The rest is yours now. E.L. He read the line twice. The place waited long enough. The phrasing felt odd, almost intentional, like a whisper smuggled across decades. Buddy rested his chin on Harlan's knee, eyes questioning. Harlan rubbed behind his ears. Looks like we've inherited something, old boy. Probably just a shack full of spiders. But even as he said it, unease prickled at the back of his neck. He remembered fragments of a childhood visit. His mother's hand clutching his shoulder, the smell of damp earth near the lake, the warning tone in Edna's voice. Not near the shed, Harlan. It's not safe. He had been 8, curious, and saw nothing more than an old wooden building half hidden by reeds. But later that night, he had woken to voices outside, low and angry. A lantern had moved across the yard, and Edna's silhouette stood between 2 men in dark coats. The memory was like a half-developed photograph, blurred but stubbornly real. He folded the papers carefully and leaned back, staring at the fire. The property might be worthless, but something in him stirred. A flicker of the same instinct that once sent him running into burning buildings. Curiosity and duty, twin devils he could never silence. By dusk, fog crept up from the lake, brushing the windows. Buddy lifted his head, ears pricked. Harlan frowned. The dog's body stiffened, muscles coiled as if bracing for an order. Outside, the wind died abruptly. In that hush, a sound echoed faintly across the water. Metal striking metal. Rhythmic, distant. He rose, peering through the window. The lake lay calm, dark as oil. Nothing moved, but Buddy growled low, a deep rumble that came from somewhere ancient and certain. All right, Harlan muttered. Enough ghosts for one day. He shut the curtains, though the unease lingered, heavy as smoke. That night, he dreamed of fire again. But this time, the blaze wasn't orange. It was blue, searing through the water, lighting up something buried deep beneath the lake's surface. When he woke before dawn, heart pounding, the envelope lay open on the table. The deed had slid halfway out, caught in the draft. In the faint light from the window, he saw something new, an embossed seal he hadn't noticed before. It wasn't from the county. It was circular, marked with a trident and 3 small letters burned faintly into the paper's grain. M.S.C. He frowned, tracing the letters. He could almost swear they hadn't been there the night before. Buddy barked once, sharp and urgent, breaking the silence. Outside, the lake was perfectly still. But the faint clang of metal echoed again, closer this time. Harlan reached for his coat. The morning came brittle and pale, with frost webbing across the porch railing like veins of glass. Harlan Pierce stood at the window, the envelope from the night before lying open on the table behind him. The lake was still cloaked in mist, quiet as if it were holding its breath. Beside him, Buddy sat alert, his ears twitching at every distant sound. There was something about the way the air hung, too still, too aware, that reminded Harlan of waiting for a roof to collapse. By noon, curiosity outweighed caution. He packed a flashlight, a crowbar, and a small first aid kit into his truck. The property described in the deed was only a 40-minute drive around the northern edge of Lake Cardon, yet he hadn't been there since he was a child. The road curled through dense pines and ridges that rose like sleeping giants. Buddy rode shotgun, nose pressed to the half-open window, the cold air combing through his fur. When the truck crested the final hill, Harlan saw it, a sagging structure half swallowed by weeds and cattails, crouched on the lakeside slope, the Latham shed. The boards were gray and sun-bleached, some planks warped outward like ribs of something once alive. The padlock on the door was orange with rust, and the roof bowed in the middle, threatening surrender. He parked nearby, engine ticking as it cooled. The silence was thick, broken only by the soft lap of water against the stones. Buddy jumped out first, sniffing the ground in widening circles. "Easy," Harlan murmured, though his own heartbeat quickened. A small gravel path led from the clearing to the water's edge. There, he noticed a new detail, a set of tire tracks, faint but fresh, pressed into the mud. Not old farm treads either. These were narrow, deep, industrial. He felt the old rescuer's instinct flare awake. "Someone's been here recently." Buddy barked once, sharp, then trotted toward the shed. He sniffed at the base of the door, then began pawing the dirt, claws scraping against something solid. Harlan crouched beside him and brushed away soil until his glove hit metal. A round lid, the size of a trash can cover, half buried. He pried it up with the crowbar, and a cool draft of stale air rose from below. A ladder descended into shadow. The scent, earth, oil, and something chemical, was unmistakable. Harlan switched on the flashlight and started down, Buddy waiting above until called. The beam sliced through the dark, illuminating a narrow space lined with concrete and pipes that looked decades old. At the far wall, a meter blinked faintly, still running. Dust floated like pale insects in the beam. He moved closer, wiping grime from the metal casing. Water flow regulator, property of Meridian Springs, LLC. The name hit him like a cold splash. Meridian Springs was the bottled water company that had set up operations south of town 5 years ago, promising jobs and eco-friendly extraction. People had celebrated at first, but lately, rumors drifted through the diner about wells running low, about creeks drying earlier each summer. Harlan's hand clenched around the flashlight. He traced one of the newer pipes. It disappeared into the wall, heading straight toward the lake. Another line ran underground, northwest, toward Pine Ferry. His chest tightened. "Buddy," he whispered. The dog padded down the ladder, paws steady, nose twitching. He circled, sniffing along the wall, then sat near a pile of old blueprints stacked under a tarp. Harlan pulled them free. The paper crackled. County survey maps, water flow charts, and hand-sketched notes in Edna Latham's careful cursive. On one sheet, she'd drawn the slope of the lake and marked a large circle labeled Old Well Access, Unrecorded. Beneath it, they lied about the boundary. He sat back on his heels, throat dry. Edna must have discovered this years ago. Maybe she tried to stop it. Maybe that was why she became the town's ghost, muttering to herself, forgotten. Buddy whined softly, staring at something behind the pipes. Harlan followed his gaze. There, in the dirt wall, lay a narrow gap, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. He crawled closer, shining the light. The tunnel led downward toward the lake, walls slick with condensation. He could hear a faint hum, a machine, still active. He was about to lean in when the crunch of tires outside froze him. Buddy's ears shot up. Harlan killed the flashlight and pressed his back to the wall, holding Buddy's collar. Two voices drifted down from above. One was male, young, irritated. The other older, calm and clipped. "Told you to check it weekly, not park on the damn routes," the older voice said. "Relax, it's fine. Nobody comes out here," the younger answered. A door hinge groaned. Boots scuffed against wood. Then a metallic clatter, the sound of a wrench hitting metal. Harlan's pulse hammered. The men were working above, maybe inspecting the pipes. If they found his truck, it would be over. Buddy stayed motionless, trained by years of discipline. He waited. 10 minutes passed, then another. Finally, footsteps retreated. An engine turned over, fading into distance. When the silence returned, Harlan exhaled shakily. He flicked the flashlight on again and scanned the small chamber. His beam caught a corner of an old wooden crate wedged behind the meter. He pried it open with the crowbar. Inside lay small, sealed canisters, labeled with coordinates and dates, each stamped with the Meridian logo. Core samples, geological extractions, proof. But why hide them here, on land, supposedly outside their permit zone? A faint hiss made him look up. One of the newer pipes trembled, then spurted a thin leak of water, clear, but smelling faintly of metal. The gauge needle flicked into the red. "Damn," he muttered, stepping back. He knew enough from years in rescue to read danger. Pressure buildup meant either the pump was overloading or the line upstream was sealed. Both could end in rupture. He snapped photos quickly with his phone, capturing the logos, the leak, the crate, the maps. Then he climbed back up the ladder, Buddy at his heels. Outside, the air tasted of iron. The sun had dipped behind the ridge, and the mist had thickened, rolling low across the ground like smoke. The tire tracks from earlier were partly erased by moisture, blending into the mud. Harlan shut the lid and covered it with soil, tamping it down until it looked undisturbed. He paused at the door, glancing once more at the lake. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw ripples forming near the far bank, though no wind stirred. Then, nothing. Back in the truck, Buddy curled on the seat but kept glancing toward the window, ears twitching. Harlan drove in silence, the headlights carving tunnels through the fog. Halfway home, his phone vibrated. Unknown number. He answered, cautious. "Mr. Pierce," a man's voice said, formal, deep. "We understand you visited the Latham property today." Harlan gripped the wheel. "Who is this?" "Just a concerned party. We'd advise you not to disturb county property without authorization. For your safety, of course." "Funny," Harlan said quietly. "I thought it was my property now." The line clicked dead. Buddy gave a low growl, deep and steady. Harlan kept driving. the reflection of the lake vanishing behind him, though he couldn't shake the feeling that something from it was still watching. When he reached his cabin, the porch light flickered twice before going dark. He frowned, stepping out with the flashlight. The bulb was new. On the porch floor, near the door, someone had left a muddy boot print, and beside it, a small, folded note, sealed in clear plastic to keep out the rain. He picked it up, heart thudding. Inside, in careful block letters, was written, "You're not the only one digging, Mr. Pierce." The wind rose, rattling the trees, and Buddy barked once into the dark, his fur standing on end. By mid-November, Pine Ferry no longer smelled of pine. The air had turned brittle, and the ground cracked where the creek used to run. People whispered in the grocery aisles and at the gas pumps about wells going dry, faucets coughing air, the lake receding like a shy animal. For a town built around water, the silence of it felt like a curse. Harlan Pierce sat in the corner booth of the Pine Ferry Diner, stirring black coffee that had long gone cold. Buddy slept at his feet, tail occasionally thumping against the floorboards whenever someone walked by. The dog drew as much quiet attention as his owner. Polite nods, half whispers of respect. A retired rescuer and his dog still carried a weight in a place like this. Across the diner, a man in a trucker's jacket complained loudly about his dry well. "Had to drive 30 miles to fill the tank," he grumbled. "And that damned company still claims the water table's fine." Others nodded, eyes darting to Harlan's corner. He kept his gaze on the window, pretending not to notice. He'd been waiting for someone. The bell above the door jingled, and a woman stepped in. She was in her late 50s, tall and lean, her hair a sweep of silver pulled into a low bun. Her glasses hung from a chain, and her long wool coat was flecked with dust from the road. Alma Brooke, the town librarian, keeper of records, secrets, and grudges. "Harlan Pierce," she said as she reached his booth, her voice calm but lined with curiosity. "Denise told me you were looking for old property deeds." "Among other things," Harlan replied, gesturing for her to sit. Buddy's ears perked up, then relaxed as she offered him a small nod. "I hear you've inherited Edna's place," Alma continued, unbuttoning her coat. "That woman was sharper than she let on. Used to check out mining reports instead of novels. Made people uneasy." "She knew something," Harlan said quietly, "and whatever it was, I think it's connected to the company running pipes under her land." Alma tilted her head, the glint in her eyes sharpening. "Meridian Springs? Yeah. You got anything on their water rights?" "Plenty. None of it makes sense." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded stack of photocopies, county water permits, maps, handwritten notes. "Their main extraction well is outside the approved boundary. I've been saying it for years. Nobody listens to a librarian." "They will now," Harlan muttered. She gave a small smile. "Maybe, but you'll need someone who can read more than paperwork. Try Lowell Tran. Used to teach geology at the state college before his heart attack. Lives off Route 17. He can tell you if the ground's dying." Before he could respond, the diner lights flickered. Outside, a gust of wind swept dust and dry leaves across the parking lot. A weathered fire truck rumbled by, siren off, just coasting. The driver, an old colleague, Jim Dole, lifted 2 fingers, in greeting, face somber. "Wildfire season again?" Alma murmured, staring out the window. "Feels wrong. Burning in November." That night, Harlan drove out to meet Lowell Tran. The man's cabin sat at the base of the ridge, surrounded by broken rock and skeletal trees. The porch light glowed faintly through mist. Buddy stayed close as Harlan knocked. The door opened to reveal a man of about 70, broad-shouldered but stooped, his face brown and creased like old leather. His hair was white and unruly, his beard trimmed short. He wore flannel and suspenders, the kind of clothes that smelled of sawdust and stubbornness. "Mr. Pierce?" His voice rasped but carried weight. Alma called ahead. "Appreciate your time," Harlan said, shaking his hand. The grip was firm. Lowell motioned him inside. The cabin was cluttered with rock samples, maps pinned to every wall, and the faint hum of a space heater. "Haven't had company in a while," he said, pouring tea into chipped mugs. "Heart gave out on me 3 years back. Doctors told me to slow down. I told them the ground doesn't stop shifting, so why should I?" He chuckled, then coughed into his sleeve. Harlan unfolded the blueprints from Edna's shed and the photos from his phone. Lowell adjusted his glasses, squinting. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered. "That's Meridian's design. But this valve, this isn't standard. They're siphoning from a lateral aquifer, deep one. That's not supposed to be touched. Could that cause the sinkholes? Sinkholes, fires, droughts, you name it. When you pull the lungs out of the earth, she can't breathe right. Everything above starts gasping too." Harlan felt a chill crawl up his spine. "You think they're covering it up?" Lowell met his gaze. "I know they are, but proving it." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "You'll need data logs, flow reports, and Meridian keeps those locked tighter than a politician's conscience." Before they could continue, Buddy lifted his head and gave a soft, warning growl. Through the window, headlights flared briefly on the dirt road, then vanished. Lowell frowned. Nobody drives this way after dark. They stepped onto the porch. The air was sharp with the scent of smoke. At first, Harlan thought it was Lowell's wood stove. Then the horizon flickered orange. "Damn it," Lowell said. "Forest fire." Harlan's instincts kicked in before the thought could form. "How far?" "Too close. Wind's pushing west, toward town." He ran to his truck, Buddy leaping in after him. Lowell shouted something behind, but the roar of the engine drowned it out. The fire had started somewhere near the ridge above the nursing home, the old Pineview Center, where most of the town's elderly lived. Flames crawled down the slope, moving fast through the brittle grass. By the time Harlan reached the site, volunteers were already shouting orders. The air was thick with ash. Sirens wailed. He could see familiar faces from his rescue days, panicked but determined. "We need help inside," someone yelled. Harlan grabbed his old turnout jacket from the truck bed, a relic he'd kept for reasons even he didn't know, and ran toward the smoke. Buddy barked and followed, unhesitating. Inside the nursing home, the lights had gone out. The hallways pulsed with red glow from the fire outside. The smell of melting plastic filled the air. "Take the west wing," a firefighter shouted. Harlan guided Buddy forward. The dog's training came alive, nose low, body tense. He barked once, veering left, then again, louder. Harlan followed, finding a door blocked by debris. He kicked it open. Inside, 2 elderly women huddled beside a fallen bookshelf. "It's all right," he said, voice calm despite the heat. "We're getting you out." Buddy pressed close, guiding one woman's trembling hand to his collar. She clung to him as if he were a lifeline. Together, they moved through the choking smoke. Outside, buses waited in the parking lot. As the last group climbed aboard, Harlan looked back. The flames reflected in his visor, turning the world into a blur of red and gold. Then he saw it, beyond the line of trees, a truck idling where it shouldn't be. Its headlights were dimmed, but the logo on the side was visible through the haze. Meridian Springs, LLC. A hose snaked from the truck into the ditch, drawing water from the emergency runoff channel. Water meant for the fire pumps. Harlan's breath caught. "You've got to be kidding me." He sprinted closer, Buddy at his side. The driver noticed and floored the accelerator, the hose snapping free as the truck roared away down the service road. Mud and sparks sprayed into the night. By the time firefighters arrived, only the tracks remained. When the blaze finally died, the nursing home still stood, blackened but intact. Harlan sat on the curb, smoke-streaked and exhausted. Buddy lay beside him, chest rising steady, fur singed at the tips. A firefighter approached, a young woman with freckles and soot-streaked cheeks. "Sir, you okay?" "Yeah," he rasped. "Just tired of watching things burn." She gave him a puzzled look, but said nothing. As dawn broke, mist rolled in from the lake again. The fire was out, but the water in the ditches was gone, siphoned, stolen, drained dry. Harlan stared at the horizon, jaw set. The town thought the danger had passed. He knew better. Something deeper was feeding the flames. Buddy nudged his hand, eyes steady. "Yeah, boy," Harlan whispered. "I saw it too." The morning after the fire came gray and trembling, the sky bruised with smoke. Ash still drifted through the streets of Pine Ferry, clinging to rooftops and mailboxes like winter that had lost its way. Harlan Pierce stood in the parking lot of the burned ridge, camera in hand, his face streaked with soot and fatigue. Buddy stood beside him, tail low but eyes sharp, watching the workers from Meridian Springs dismantle the temporary pumps near the ditch. The men wore clean uniforms, too clean for people who claimed to have been up all night helping the town. Their trucks gleamed silver against the blackened trees. A new security guard stepped forward, and as Harlan raised his phone to snap another photo. He was a tall man, mid-30s, with a shaven head and a scar cutting down from his temple to the corner of his mouth. The badge on his vest read J. Marin. His posture was military, rigid, controlled, with the kind of discipline that left no room for warmth. "Sir," he said, voice level, but warning, "you're trespassing on private property." "This is county land," Harlan replied, lowering the phone, but not his gaze. "Not anymore." Marin stepped closer. His eyes were the color of steel dust, cold, reflective, and empty. "You should turn around. I'd hate for anyone to get hurt twice in the same week." Before Harlan could answer, the ground shuddered underfoot. A low groan rippled through the dirt, and the edge of the burned slope began to crumble. Marin stumbled back instinctively. Harlan slipped, the phone jerking from his hand, and the world tilted toward the smoking ravine. "Buddy!" he shouted. The dog lunged, teeth gripping the strap of Harlan's backpack, digging paws into the mud. The weight of 60 pounds of trained muscle countered the pull of gravity. For a moment, everything froze. The soft tearing of fabric, the slide of gravel, the echo of Harlan's boots scraping for traction. Then, with a grunt, he rolled backward onto solid ground, clutching the dirt. Marin's face hardened. "You shouldn't be here," he said again, and walked away as if nothing had happened. Buddy stood panting beside Harlan, tail stiff, fur matted with ash. Harlan ruffled his ears with a trembling hand. "Yeah," he muttered. "They're scared. That's good." He retrieved his phone, cracked but working, and scrolled through the photos. Pipes, logos, the fire hose rerouted through Meridian equipment. Enough to raise questions, maybe even enough to stop them for a while. By afternoon, he was sitting across from a new face in town, a lawyer named Nora Castillo, whom Alma had recommended. Her office was tucked inside an old pharmacy building, the windows still painted with the ghost letters of Miller's Drugs. Nora was in her early 40s, short, sharp, with hair black as ink and a streak of silver at her temple. She wore a navy blazer over jeans and carried herself like someone who had learned to win fights without raising her voice. Her eyes were dark, direct, assessing. "Mr. Pierce," she said, offering a firm handshake. "Alma called ahead. Said you were bringing something that smells like trouble." "I've got photos," Harlan said, sliding his phone across the desk. "And more where those came from." Nora leaned forward, scrolling. Her brow tightened. "These lines, they're feeding into the lake's watershed. They're not supposed to be anywhere near the emergency channel." Lowell Tran confirmed it, said they're drawing from a restricted aquifer. She leaned back, tapping a pen against her notebook. "Then this is bigger than a zoning violation. This is environmental fraud, possibly criminal negligence." "I'm not looking for headlines," Harlan said quietly. "I just want the water back." "Then we'll need a judge's ear," Nora replied. "I'll file for an emergency injunction, but it won't hold unless the town backs you." "The town's split," Harlan admitted. "Half of them depend on Meridian's payroll." "Then show them something they can't ignore," Nora said. "People trust their eyes, not paperwork." That night, Harlan went door to door with Buddy trotting at his side. The air smelled faintly of wet smoke and pine resin, the residue of a town pretending nothing was wrong. He stopped at the houses of old neighbors, families he'd once rescued from floods, fires, and foreclosure alike. At the Klein's house, Mrs. Klein, a widow in her 70s, stood in her robe, eyes sunken from exhaustion. "We haven't had running water for 2 days," she whispered. "They keep saying the pump's broken." "It's not the pump," Harlan said softly. "It's Meridian. They're pulling more than they should." She shook her head, frightened. "Don't get involved, Harlan. Men like that don't lose nicely." At the next house, a young mechanic named Eli Porter, broad-shouldered, oil-stained, mid-20s, met him at the door. Eli had the restless energy of someone too young to have lost faith, but too old to keep pretending he hadn't. "I work maintenance up there," Eli said in a low voice. "You're right. They pump at night, unregistered hours. I can't talk long, but—" He looked around, then pressed a small USB drive into Harlan's palm. "Here, security footage, flow data. Keep it quiet." "Why help me?" Eli hesitated, eyes flicking toward Buddy, then back. "My dad died on that lake last year. Meridian said it was an accident. I stopped believing them when the coroner's report disappeared." Harlan nodded, his chest heavy. "You did the right thing." "Tell that to my paycheck," Eli muttered, closing the door before he could say more. By the time Harlan returned home, the streetlights were flickering. The town generator, starved for water cooling, was beginning to strain. Inside, Buddy paced near the window, uneasy. Harlan sat at his table, uploading the data onto an old laptop. Rows of numbers filled the screen. timestamps, coordinates, flow rates. The volume of water extracted at night was double what Meridian reported publicly. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "They're bleeding us dry," he murmured. A faint tap at the window made Buddy whirl around with a growl. Harlan stood, peering through the glass. Across the road, a dark SUV idled with its headlights off. He couldn't see the driver. After a moment, the engine revved, and the car pulled away, taillights vanishing into fog. The next morning, Nora called. "I've got a hearing scheduled," she said. "Judge Kemp owes me a favor, but he'll need something tangible. Bring the USB. At the courthouse, Harlan waited in the hallway, hands buried in his jacket. Nora spoke in low tones with the clerk, while Buddy lay obediently by his feet, tail occasionally sweeping the floor. From the far end of the hall, a man in a tailored gray suit approached. Smooth, confident. His smile honed like glass. Daniel Carter, Meridian's regional manager. He was in his 50s, tall, with neatly combed blonde hair and a voice that belonged on commercials. "Mr. Pierce," he said, stopping just short of polite distance, "I hear you've taken an interest in our operations." "I'm just trying to keep my town alive," Harlan said. Carter smiled thinly. "So are we. Jobs, infrastructure, economic growth. You know how these things work." "Yeah," Harlan said. "I also know what theft looks like." Carter's smile faltered for the briefest second, then returned. "You were a rescuer once, weren't you? You understand cost. Sometimes saving one thing means losing another." He reached into his coat, slipped a business card into Harlan's pocket. "Call me when you realize which side has the deeper well." Then he turned and walked away, leaving the faint scent of cologne and money in his wake. Nora reappeared moments later, eyes sharp. "Who was that?" "Meridian's mouthpiece." "Then we're in the right fight," she said. "The judge approved the motion. Temporary halt to pumping until we verify the data. We've bought time." Harlan exhaled slowly, looking down at Buddy. "For now." That night, rain finally came. A weak, uncertain drizzle that barely kissed the dust. Harlan stood on his porch, watching it vanish before touching the ground. Buddy sat beside him, head tilted as if listening to something far away. "Feels like the storm's waiting for permission," Harlan whispered. In the distance, lightning flared over the ridge, silent and brief. The first battle had begun, but the ground beneath Pine Ferry was still shifting, and Harlan knew the next choice he made could bury them all. The rain came, like it had been waiting all season for permission. Sheets of it fell against the cracked pavement of Pine Ferry, turning ash into sludge and washing soot from the burned hills into the gutters. For the first time in months, the parched earth drank, but greedily, unevenly, as though the ground itself had forgotten how to accept kindness. Harlan Pierce drove through the storm, with Buddy sitting upright in the passenger seat, both headlights cutting narrow tunnels through the downpour. His wipers struggled to keep rhythm, and each strike of rain on the windshield sounded like the tick of a countdown clock. At dawn, the temporary hearing was set to begin at the county courthouse. Nora Castillo had called just before the storm broke, her voice taut with both relief and tension. "We've got Judge Kemp's attention," she said, "but he wants verification. If Meridian's system is dangerous, we need physical evidence before noon." "Then that's where I'm headed," Harlan told her. He turned off the main road and followed the dirt track leading back to the Latham property, now half flooded. The lake had swelled beyond its banks, brown water slapping against the reeds. The shed stood tilted, one wall sagging as if the weight of the storm pressed directly on it. Harlan parked at a distance. The ground near the structure had started to bubble with thin streams of rising air, pockets of gas escaping from somewhere below. Buddy leapt out, sniffing the wind, his fur soaked almost immediately. Harlan grabbed a flashlight, crowbar, and wrench from the truck, moving fast. The hatch leading underground was buried under inches of rainwater, but he managed to pry it open. A metallic groan echoed upward, and a burst of humid air hit his face. "Stay close," he told Buddy. The dog's ears flicked forward, alert. They descended into the dark again, the flashlight's beam cutting through damp mist. Water trickled down the concrete walls, pooling around Harlan's boots. The meters on the far wall still blinked faintly, but now several red lights pulsed in warning. He moved toward the main control valve, tracing the pipes with his hand. Pressure gauges trembled in the red zone. The stormwater runoff from the ridge was being forced into Meridian's buried system. The pipes were designed for draw, not push. Somewhere above, rain was feeding into a network that had nowhere safe to go. Buddy growled low, attention fixed on a section of pipe at the far corner. The flashlight revealed a rusted valve wheel, its markings half gone but still legible enough for Harlan to make out. Relief drain, south basin. He remembered the layout from Edna's old blueprints. That valve directed overflow toward the lowest section of Pine Ferry, the residential quarter near the old school and community well. If it burst or opened, the floodwater, now contaminated with mineral residue and industrial runoff, would pour straight into the town's only water source. "Damn it," Harlan muttered. They rerouted the relief to hide their waste. He tried the valve. It wouldn't budge. The metal resisted, like a jaw clenched in denial. He strained again, the wrench slipping in his wet hands. The pressure in the pipe groaned, and water spurted from the seams. Above, thunder rolled like a voice clearing its throat. Harlan pulled out his phone and dialed Nora. Static crackled. Then her voice came faintly through the interference. "Harlan, where are you?" "In the Meridian drain chamber. The overflow's building. Pressure's off the charts." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying if this valve gives, we lose the town's drinking water." She cursed softly on the other end. "The court just signed the order. You can shut it down if you have proof. We'll send the sheriff." "No time," Harlan said. "It's happening now." "Be careful," she pleaded. "Don't." The line went dead. Buddy's bark drew his attention back to the pipe. The pressure gauge needle vibrated violently, the glass fogging. The dog pawed the ground anxiously, circling as if searching for an exit. Harlan took a breath, every instinct from his rescue days screaming conflicting orders. Close the valve and risk explosion, or open it and poison the town's wells. He could almost hear his old captain's voice echoing in memory. "In every fire, you pick who you save. The rest, you learn to live with." He slammed the wrench onto the valve and twisted hard. It gave only a fraction before stopping. Water hissed from the joints like steam. Buddy barked again, short, sharp warning. A section of ceiling crumbled behind them, sending a spray of muddy water down the tunnel. "Hold on, boy," Harlan said, teeth clenched. "We're not leaving it like this." He spotted a junction pipe branching off the main line, an auxiliary conduit that led toward the western drainage field. If he could divert the excess there, the contaminated water would pool into an abandoned quarry instead of the residential zone. But doing so required manually locking open the auxiliary gate while closing the main relief. Two opposite motions on different valves. He couldn't do both alone. Harlan looked at Buddy, who was already watching him with an almost human understanding. "Stay," he said firmly. "When I say pull, you pull that rope. Got it?" He tied a length of frayed cable around the auxiliary handle and looped the other end through Buddy's harness. The dog whined once, tail flicking nervously, but stayed. Harlan returned to the main valve, bracing himself. The storm roared louder, as if the whole mountain was breathing. He counted aloud, voice barely audible over the noise. 3, 2, 1, now! He twisted with all his strength. The valve shrieked, turning a quarter revolution. At the same instant, Buddy lunged forward, straining against the cable. The auxiliary gate yanked open, the sound like metal screaming underwater. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the system roared alive. A violent gush thundered through the pipes, shaking the floor. Harlan fell backward as water exploded from a side vent, spraying the walls. The pressure gauge flickered, then stabilized, dropping from red to amber. The relief worked. The contaminated surge was being redirected. But the noise didn't stop. It deepened, rumbling through the tunnel like something vast and angry awakening. Harlan grabbed Buddy's harness. Time to go. They climbed the ladder as water began flooding the lower chamber. By the time they reached the surface, the shed's floorboards were vibrating. The storm had turned into a deluge. Lightning painted the hills white every few seconds. Harlan sprinted toward the truck, Buddy bounding beside him. Behind them, the ground convulsed. A muffled boom rolled through the earth as part of the underground conduit collapsed. Mud and water surged upward, bursting from the ground in a geyser of sludge. They dove behind the truck as debris rained down. When the air cleared, a wide crater yawned where the shed had been. The old Latham property was gone, swallowed whole. Buddy whimpered softly, pressed against Harlan's leg. He rubbed the dog's neck, chest heaving. "It's all right, boy," he said hoarsely. "We bought them time." His phone buzzed, somehow still working despite the water. Nora's voice came through, half drowned by static. "Harlan, are you there?" The sheriff confirmed it. "The judge saw the data. Meridian's permit is suspended pending investigation. You did it." Harlan looked at the crater steaming in the rain. "No," he said quietly. "We just opened the next chapter." Lightning flashed again, illuminating the silhouette of a figure standing at the tree line. A man in a raincoat, unmoving. Even from that distance, Harlan recognized the posture. J. Marin, the scarred guard. The man raised a hand slowly, not in greeting, but as if pointing straight at Harlan. Then he turned and vanished into the storm. Buddy growled low, hackles raised. "Yeah," Harlan murmured. "I saw him too." The rain kept falling, relentless. Somewhere below, water and mud mingled with the secrets they had tried to bury. For Pine Ferry, the flood had been stopped, but the fire above ground had only just begun. The sirens began before dawn. They bled into the thunder, distant but rising, like something clawing up from the edge of the world. Pine Ferry was drowning, not in the rain that still hammered the hills, but in the weight of what it had buried for too long. Harlan Pierce parked his truck near the collapsed ridge where the old shed had stood. The road was gone, replaced by a river of mud swirling with debris and the faint stink of chemical runoff. Buddy barked once, sharp, impatient. He could sense it, the wrongness beneath the surface, the heavy pulse of something waiting to give way. Harlan stepped out into knee-high water, his flashlight slicing through the fog. "Easy, boy," he murmured, clipping a climbing rope to his belt and another to Buddy's harness. The air reeked of wet earth and metal. The lake's overflow had found new paths underground, twisting through Meridian's shattered pipelines. Every breath tasted of rust. He reached the remains of the access hatch, now half submerged. The metal door groaned as he pried it open, the hinges grinding like old bones. Steam rose from below, warm, foul, and thick. The underground chamber was flooding fast. Somewhere in that darkness, valves and switches were still trying to do their jobs, but the system was failing. Buddy whined, pacing at the edge. Harlan ran a gloved hand along his head, feeling the dog's muscles trembling with restrained energy. "Stay put. No heroics this time," he said. But even as he said it, he knew Buddy never listened when life was at stake. He descended the ladder, boots splashing into waist-deep water. The flashlight beam jumped across the walls, catching the warning stencils. Meridian pressure main, danger, flood zone. Words that now seemed absurdly redundant. The relief valve he'd turned the day before was underwater. He traced the pipe upward, searching for the auxiliary release. The storm had forced the aquifer to backflow into the system, pushing every joint to its limit. If one line ruptured, the surge would hit the lower neighborhoods like a sledgehammer. His phone buzzed weakly in his pocket. Nora's voice broke through static. "Harlan! County's sending rescue. Stay out of that tunnel. The integrity's gone." He wiped rain from his eyes, shouting over the echoing roar. "If I don't redirect it, the South Basin will collapse. There's a whole street down there. Damn it, Harlan." Then silence. The call dropped. He shoved the phone into his jacket and waded deeper. The current tugged at his legs now, swirling with grit. Buddy barked above him, the sound echoing down the shaft. Then the beam of a second flashlight appeared from above. Someone had arrived. Voices followed, faint at first, then clearer. The volunteer rescue crew Nora must have sent. "Pierce," a man shouted, "you've got about 5 minutes before this thing caves in." "Then 5's all I need," he yelled back. The main pressure gauge was buried in rising water, but the vent pipe above it quivered violently, a hollow moan building inside it. He turned the wheel halfway, forcing open the upper relief. The flow diverted slightly, but not enough. Buddy's barking changed, urgent, repetitive. Harlan looked up. The dog wasn't just barking. He was looking beyond the hatch, toward the slope. Then the realization hit. Something heavy was shifting above. The floor shuddered. A section of the overhead planks gave way, water gushing in with brutal force. The chamber shook, walls groaning like a trapped beast. Harlan's mind raced. The only way to stabilize pressure was to breach the lower valve, the same one holding the evidence of Meridian's illegal modifications. Destroying it meant erasing proof. But saving the neighborhood meant opening that vent now. He hesitated for less than a breath. Then he muttered, "To hell with the paperwork." He pulled a wrench from his belt, set it on the corroded joint, and twisted hard. The metal screamed. Water surged through the seam, spraying his face. Another twist, another groan. The valve burst with a deafening crack, releasing a torrent that slammed into the lower drain tunnel. For a second, it worked. The flow found a path downward, away from the town. But the relief was short-lived. The floor beneath his feet trembled. The main pipe, relieved of pressure but not structure, began to split. The explosion came like the roar of a collapsing mountain. Water hit him with the force of a hammer, spinning him off his feet. The flashlight flew from his hand. The rope at his waist jerked taut, yanking him sideways into the rising current. Above, Buddy barked frantically, then leapt into the hatch opening, ignoring the shouts of rescuers behind him. His paws hit the ladder rungs, claws scraping metal as he slid down toward the chaos below. "Buddy!" Harlan gasped, coughing water. The beam of the fallen flashlight flickered across the flooding chamber. The dog's silhouette cut through the spray, harness rope dragging behind. The current caught them both, slamming them into the wall. Harlan reached for the line, fingers numb, lungs screaming. Buddy lunged forward, teeth locking onto the rope clipped to Harlan's belt. For one suspended moment, man and dog cow became a single motion, a desperate pull upward through dark, churning water. Harlan's boots found traction on a submerged step, and together they climbed, fighting the drag. When they burst through the hatch, the world outside had turned white with headlights and rain. Volunteers in yellow ponchos crowded around, shouting, pulling them free. Mud and water poured from Harlan's coat as he collapsed on the slick ground, coughing hard. Buddy shook himself beside him, soaked and trembling but alive. His brown eyes met Harlan's, wide and fierce, as if demanding to know what had taken so long. "You disobeyed," Harlan wheezed, then managed a hoarse laugh. "Good job." The roar from below faded to a dull gurgle. The breach had drained the pressure, but also buried everything beneath tons of debris. A sheriff's cruiser skidded to a stop nearby, lights cutting through the rain. Nora Castillo stepped out, hair plastered to her face, mascara streaking but eyes bright. "You're insane!" she shouted, running toward him. "You could have died down there." "Wouldn't be the first time," he rasped. Then he pulled something from his inner pocket, a folded plastic-wrapped document. "Didn't lose everything." Nora knelt, unwrapping it. Inside was Edna's old map, marked with the original water channels, mud-stained but intact. This shows the illegal reroute," she whispered. "It's enough." Cameras flashed behind her. Reporters had arrived with the sheriff's convoy. The rain reflected their lights like stars drowning in mud. Someone shouted, "Get back! The ground's unstable!" But for the first time, Harlan didn't move. He stared at the crater, chest heaving, and felt the strange calm that comes when a long-held breath finally releases. Buddy pressed his nose against Harlan's arm, whimpering softly. The warmth of that touch grounded him more than any applause or siren ever could. Nora squeezed his shoulder. "You saved the town," she said quietly. "No," he replied. "We just gave it a chance to breathe again." The rescue lights blurred in the rain. The broken earth hissed and steamed, releasing the last of its pressure. Somewhere below, the water ran clean for the first time in years. By the time the snow came to Pine Ferry, the ground had stopped trembling. The lake, swollen and scarred, finally held still beneath a glassy layer of ice. The fires had been doused, the mud had dried, and the roar of pumps that once stole the town's breath was gone. Winter, in its quiet way, had closed the wound. It took 3 weeks for the official papers to arrive. Nora Castillo brought them herself, bundled in a heavy wool coat and boots splashed with road salt. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, and she carried a thermos steaming with cinnamon coffee. She found Harlan Pierce outside the rebuilt shed, his gloved hands tightening the hinges on a new door. Buddy sat nearby, chin on his paws, watching as though supervising a construction site. They finally folded, Nora said, smiling faintly. Meridian signed the settlement this morning. Compensation, cleanup, and full transfer of the water rights to the Pine Ferry Clean Water Trust. You're officially free of them. Harlan leaned on his hammer, squinting into the pale sunlight. His beard had grown grayer since autumn, and the lines around his eyes had softened into something gentler. Free's a big word, he said quietly, but it'll do. They'll pay for every gallon they stole, Nora continued, handing him the papers. And this. She pulled out an envelope stamped with the county seal. Is for you. Recognition of public service. Not quite a medal, but close enough. He chuckled. Haven't worn one of those since the service. Didn't much care for the ceremony then, either. You earned this one, she said, her tone softer. We all know it. Buddy barked once, tail brushing against Harlan's boot, as if in agreement. A week later, the shed reopened, not as evidence of wrongdoing, but as a place of learning. Harlan had stripped away the burnt timbers, sanded the old walls, and hung a hand-painted sign above the door. Buddy Station, Community Safety and Water Awareness Center. Children from the local school came on field trips, led by Mrs. Carmody, a round woman with a sharp voice and a heart too big for her cardigan. She taught them how to test smoke alarms, how to filter water, and how to call for help when something didn't feel right. Harlan demonstrated how to tie rescue knots, his hands still steady despite the scars. You don't need to be strong, he told the kids. You just need to be sure. Buddy would sit beside him, letting the children take turns petting his thick fur. He tolerated it all with the patience of a saint and the dignity of an old soldier. At the back of the shed stood a large metal tank connected to the hill's runoff, a clean water reserve open to anyone during drought season. No questions, no charge. The plaque beside it read, "This water belongs to everyone who remembers what it means to share." The town began to change in small, stubborn ways. The people who had once argued in the diner now shared tables again. The fishing club, disbanded during the drought, reformed with plans to restock the lake come spring. Even the teenagers, who used to mock the old man with the dog, started helping repaint fences and deliver bottled water to elders on icy mornings. And through it all, Harlan moved quietly among them, fixing, teaching, checking smoke detectors in the houses he'd sold years ago. His past guilt, once sharp and raw, had turned into something like discipline, a steady rhythm of doing right, one task at a time. On a cold afternoon near Christmas, he stood with Nora outside the courthouse as the final hearing concluded. Reporters were there again, but this time their cameras caught no shouting, no chaos, only signatures and the steady flash of approval stamps. Daniel Carter, Meridian's former manager, was nowhere to be seen. Rumor had it he'd resigned and left the state. Judge Kemp, a man built like a winter oak, with spectacles always sliding down his nose, read the closing statement aloud. The corporation Meridian Springs LLC admits liability for unauthorized extraction and hereby transfers ownership of all relevant infrastructure to the community trust, effective immediately. When the gavel struck, Pine Ferry became its own keeper again. As people filed out, Nora looked at Harlan and smiled. You realize you could have sold that property back for a fortune. Maybe, he said, but then I'd still be selling pieces of what we fought for. She laughed softly. Always the stubborn one. Maybe, he echoed, but It kept me alive. That night, snow began to fall. A soft, patient snow that didn't try right to cover everything, just softened the hard edges. Harlan and Buddy walked along Main Street, past windows glowing with Christmas lights and the smell of cinnamon pies. People waved as they passed. A few children ran to greet Buddy, their laughter ringing against the quiet air. For once, the town didn't see a rescuer, a whistleblower, or a hero. They just saw a man and his dog making sure the world stayed steady a little longer. Back home, Harlan built a fire. The warmth filled the room slowly, licking at the chill that had lived in his bones for years. Buddy curled beside the hearth, his muzzle flecked with more gray than before. The radio hummed softly, a local announcer talking about the new community project, the improved water systems, and the town's upcoming memorial for the old Pine Ferry disaster victims. Harlan stared into the flames, listening. There was peace in the way the wood cracked. A knock came at the door. It was Eli Porter, the young driller whose data had turned the tide. His jacket was patched and worn, face ruddy from the cold. "Heard you were setting up classes next month," he said, shyly holding a rolled blueprint. "Thought I could help rig the rain collector." "Come in, kid," Harlan said, moving aside. "We'll get you some coffee." Buddy thumped, his tail in approval. By spring, Pine Ferry had turned from a wounded town into something resilient. The water flowed clean again. The hills sprouted young green shoots. The sound of children playing near the lake returned, the laughter Harlan hadn't heard in years. He and Buddy made their rounds in the evenings, walking slow circuits past the houses he once sold. He'd check the porch lights, test the alarm boxes, tighten a loose hinge here and there. It wasn't hero's work. It was human work, the kind that built a life without fanfare. Sometimes he'd stop at the edge of the lake where the fog rose like silk over the surface. The reflection of the rebuilt Buddy station shimmered in the water, its light steady and warm. One morning, he brought Buddy to the dock just as the sun rose. The water was so still it seemed to listen. He sat down, boots creaking, and the dog rested his head on Harlan's shoes. The air smelled of pine and thawing soil. Harlan reached down, scratching behind Buddy's ear. "You know," he said softly, "we never did get that retirement we talked about." Buddy's tail brushed against his leg, slow and content. "Yeah," Harlan smiled. "Maybe this is better." A flock of geese crossed the pale sky, their cries fading into the quiet valley. Behind them, Pine Ferry's houses glowed like embers refusing to go out, and for the first time since that long-ago fire, the one he never forgave himself for, Harlan felt no need to run. The world was small, complete, enough. He leaned back on the dock, snow melting under his boots, the horizon blurring into morning light. Beside him, Buddy sighed, a deep, steady sound that matched the lake's gentle rhythm. Where the water rested, so did the man who had finally learned how to. When the storm passed and the waters found their place again, Pine Ferry learned something only time and grace can teach: that miracles don't always arrive with thunder or light. Sometimes they come quietly, through the hands of ordinary people who choose kindness over comfort, courage over silence. Maybe that's how God works in this world, not by parting the seas, but by steadying the hearts that refuse to stop giving. every act of care, every small rescue, every moment you choose to show up, that's a prayer made real. So, if this story touched you, take a moment to thank the Lord for the quiet blessings around you, for the roof above, the clean water, the loyal hearts beside you. Leave a comment sharing what home means to you. Tell us who's been your buddy in life, the one who stayed when things got hard. And if you believe the world still holds room for second chances, subscribe and help this message reach someone who's lost faith in their own miracle. May God bless you, and may His peace rest gently where your waters finally grow still.